So I'm going to share my personal journey, which Aditya was kind enough to slowly and step by step articulate, and which finally led to the creation of the world's first multi-family health office and a family well-being trust. As I share my journey, I'd like you to reflect on two things, if that's okay. One is, are you, the family office that you have or that you're about to create or that you have created for a long time, is it truly providing the needs, and when I mean needs, the multidimensional needs of the family? Or is it, like Aditya mentioned, and I've had lots of debate with Barbara Hauser, who spoke last night, about the definition of a family office? Or is it just managing money, as Aditya mentioned? The second question I'd like you to reflect on is that if the next gen CEO were to experience something, and I pray to God they don't, similar to or even less challenging as I did as I share my story, do you have a structure in place that you would be able to respond and not react to the circumstances that are presented, to support, love, care the CEO themselves, their spouse, their children, and the family at large? Okay, so I'll begin by sharing my story. The real purpose, this is about you, it's not about me. The purpose of sharing the story is for reflection, introspection, and for you to choose differently post this 1 hour that we spend together in terms of how you serve your family at large. So as Aditya said, I'm a third generation family member. I'm born in the Congo, raised in Belgium, finished my school in Canada, went to university in the US, worked in New York as an investment banker, and moved to Hong Kong in 1992. Three of the third gen, which is my brother, myself, and my cousin, decided not to join the family business. We decided to venture on our own, and in 1991, post the Berlin Wall falling down, we decided to enter Hungary as a start, which was classified as Eastern Europe, and to build a textile company. Over the 20 years, we became the largest player in textile in the region and became the largest licensee to Disney, Warner Brothers, Cartoon Network, the football teams, etc. Then in 2000, we decided to enter war-torn Africa. So we entered countries like Angola, Congo, Sudan, Burundi. I think you get the picture. All ex-Civil War countries, where we built 4 divisions. One was FMCG, second was pharma, generic pharma, and we were actually the first ones to bring anti-HIV drugs from the Indian company Cipla to many of these countries. Third was white goods. We represented Haier and a few other companies. And the fourth was generic commodities. And so at the age of 35, with about 10,000 employees, a business in the hundreds of millions, operations in 15 countries, I felt like I was on top of the world. I was walking out of my doctor's office and he said, "Whatever God you believe in, please pray." It was not something that you want to hear from a doctor. The next day morning, I had a PET CT, and in the afternoon, he told me I had stage 3 cancer. As you can imagine, at the age of 35, it was beyond a shock. It was not something that I had planned for, not something that I had even envisioned or imagined. The next day I was in hospital. They conducted a biopsy. I actually did the handover of the company to my core team. And of course, my brother and my cousin were there as advisors to help them continue the management of the company. It was a 5-minute conversation where I mentioned that I travel 6 months of the year. I don't run the company day to day. I'm no longer active CEO, and that anything said to me or shared with me is at the risk of being fired. That was my handover. The second thing I did was to call my lawyer in Switzerland to tell him my predicament. And lucky for me, at the age of 28, actually 27, I had created a foundation in case something were to happen. Didn't imagine it was cancer, but maybe some kind of accident. So lucky for me, I didn't have to sign any papers or do anything of the sort because the house was in order. And then we began. I had 20 rounds of chemo. I had 3 surgeries over a span of 10 months. Now, when this was about to begin, I sat with my oncologist and I said, "Doc, what happened?" He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "What happened? I'm 35 years old and this is, I assume, quite surprising." He said, "Yes, it is." So I said, "So please explain." He said, "I have no explanation." Now, lucky for me, his classmate was the founder of the cure. So I said, "Well, why don't you ask him to explain how a 35-year-old who gets his annual checkup every end January, doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, never tried drugs because too scared, doesn't drink coffee, doesn't drink tea, could end up with 10 tumors in his body, the largest being the size of a Rubik's Cube in the center of his chest, a tennis ball in his neck, and 8 in his lungs." And he said, "I'm sorry, he doesn't understand either." Now, as you can imagine, I can't see you, but I'm sure if you are an entrepreneur, being told that you may not survive with kids, with 2 boys that are 1 and 3, with no explanation is not something that you just take very lightly. So I'm sure, like many of you, I decided to try to understand how I could have contributed to my disease. And so I started to build a team, which at that time, these names didn't exist, but functional medicine, integrated medicine, psychotherapists, mind trainers, Ayurvedic masters, and beyond. And through that, they started to, first step was to explain to me that the definition of health is not confined to medical. And so they started to explain that, let's begin. So first we started to look at my physical state of being, which included nutrition, fitness, my sleep, my gut health, my brain health, and my energy levels. And that was the first step. So we started to kind of look into this space. Then they started to look at my mental and emotional state, my thoughts, my emotions, my feelings, my level of presence, my level of engagement, and whether I was reactive, responsive, and of course, from your perspective, maybe what we call stress. The third element we started to look at was my relationships. But of course, interestingly enough, it started with myself. What was the story that was driving me? And in my case, it was, am I good enough? And that wasn't a story that was truly of servitude. Now, of course, many of us think we're doing this trying to prove our worth to our parents or our siblings or our grandparents, but actually it's to ourselves. The second was my relationship with my spouse and my children. And then thirdly, my sibling, which is my brother, my cousin, and my parents and the family at large, and then the community at large. By looking at all these dimensions, first we moved from health to well-being. And then we started to look at all of these elements and started to address them one by one. So by June 30, which is 10 months later, I was confirmed in remission. And interestingly enough, family members started to approach me to help them with their medical challenges. So I spent time in clinics, I spent time in hospitals, I spent time with them in their homes, and even, washing bodies, burying them. And I started to realize that we are looking at health from a very, very single-dimensional perspective. And then as I spent time, I was able to help them understand the trigger and the source of disease. And I did this for my family for about 7 years and became the go-to guy. But in actuality, we had built a family health office for our family. Then in 2012, I had moved back to Hong Kong from Dubai, and I decided that it's time to provide this initially to friends, including the family, and then maybe to other families globally. So it's September of 2012. I recruited a team to now live with what we all talk about, our passion, our dream, our, et cetera. And what's interesting is when I was 13, if you asked me what I wanted to become, I would answer to you, part-time doctor, part-time businessman. Now, as you can imagine, my father spoke, walked, talked, slept business. So, and here I was in 2012, going into a space of that kind of balance. So here I was, very excited, again on top of the world, saying, wow, now I'm going to really live my passion, my dream, my truth, my inner core. And 3 weeks later, I turn in bed towards my wife, and she turns to me and says, I'm very sorry, I can't do this anymore. I don't love you. And that was a complete different experience. There was nothing that I had prepared for that comment. There was nothing that I'd imagined. This was the love of my life. And so I crawled back into my little corner and didn't know what to do. My standing heart rate was at 100 for the next 3 to 4 months until I decided to go to a silent retreat to balance my sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. I cried more, I begged more, I just didn't know where to begin. And so that began a 3-year journey of being in limbo. My team didn't know what was going on because, I just, hired the team and come in from that space. Now, again, lucky for me, I'd already built a team of a number of individuals, and that expanded to truly understand what happened. So I was present, but I wasn't engaged. I was physically there, but mentally not. We then worked through with integrative doctors to discuss, to go through the blame, the shame, the unspoken, to look at how that was impacting our children. And within that process, today, she's treated the same way she was treated by myself and my family, other than the fact that we are not married and that we don't share a physical relationship. So I'm just sharing with you some of things that can happen to any of us. Now, it doesn't have to be as dramatic as cancer, it doesn't have to be as dramatic as a divorce. And so in the last 14 and a half years, we've had the honor and privilege to support families, irrespective of where they are in the life stage of their life. Whether they're in the planning stage and everything is fine and we're saying, okay, how do we maintain harmony? How do we create legacy? How do we plan for generational continuity and family longevity? So whether you're in that stage or you're in the transition stage where you're about to move from CEO to chairman, or you're about to become an empty nester and the children have finished school and now going to university and starting to create their own life. Whether you've just sold your company and now deciding what is next. Or you're currently in an acute or chronic situation. You're having relationship issues with your spouse. You've been diagnosed or in a state where it's either life-altering or life-threatening. You are having issues in the family in terms of harmony, right? Whether it's the children, whether it's the siblings, or it's something that is of a personal nature, that you would not treat yourself, right? You would not treat your worst enemy the way you treat yourself. So irrespective of where these families are on their journey, just like Dennis talked about, right, in terms of the 100-year families, he shared this morning all the different elements that were required beyond the trusted advisor to be able to create that family longevity and generational continuity. So we have now today the honor and privilege to be able to serve families all over the world, including India, of course, to support them, to create a system and a structure, right? To be able to bring family first, right? It's a family business. It's a family office. What are we doing for the family members in every stage of their life, from birth until it's time to pass? And that's, and we do that through a methodology of assessment. And through that assessment, we create a well-being report from which space we look at what are the 3 key insights that came up? What are the growth opportunities that are available to the individual and the family? And what are the desired outcomes that we can help support? And from that, the families choose, and then we build an infrastructure, and I don't mean infrastructure as only physical, from a physical perspective, a mental, emotional perspective, and a relational perspective. And from there, we begin the process of change. So I don't want to continue this as a monologue. This is, again, like I said about you, it would have been an honor and privilege to be here in person. But today, we're doing our best through this wonderful platform called Zoom or whatever else that you use. And so I would like to open up to questions, to resistance, to reflection, to personal stories, whatever came up as I shared. I would really, truly love to engage and share further as you share with us. So Aditya, if it's okay, if we can unmute step by step, I guess you already have, I can see that. So who would like to begin with the first question?
Your clients remotely.
Okay, so the thing is that, for example, so one is obviously there'll be an infrastructure built for you wherever you live. When I say infrastructure, means from the medical side, right? So I'll go into detail, for example, locally. So we will help you first review where you stand today in terms of your medical side, right? I want to make sure the house is in order. Do you have a medical team that you're happy about and that is there and accessible to you as you need? The third is, are your medical records accessible anywhere, anytime on a global perspective, right? And of course, encrypted and safe. Then it's looking at, do you have a medical infrastructure where when you travel, you're able to access assistance 24/7 globally, right? And we provide that, right? And then you're looking at second opinion. Something were to happen to somebody in the family, and you are looking at what are the best in class globally and arranging a second opinion, whether it's from somewhere in Asia or Europe or United States. We are doing that on a regular basis. That doesn't mean that we must execute the care in those countries, but at least we have the opinion to make sure that the best in class is aligned with the local, okay? And then of course, in terms of coaching, in terms of the practitioners, a lot of it can be done remotely, right? So for example, gut and sleep health. Everyone receives a Garmin watch like I'm wearing. You get a chest band, you wear it for 2 nights and 1 day. We get the data downloaded through FirstBeat, and then we look at, are you actually getting rest and recovery, which means is the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system aligned? And if we see that there isn't, then we may ask you to do a urine test, which is 2 12-hour tests to see cortisol levels and melatonin levels in the urine, right? So those are some of the practical elements, but a lot of it is done remotely. We do have people in India, of course, that are also there to physically, but as you know now with COVID, it's a little more challenging. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, Faisal, I'm Sangeeta here.
Yes.
So I can completely correlate with the experience that you've gone through. In fact, I haven't gone through the experience myself, but my family had major health issues. And in fact, I wanted to share that this is what actually inspired me to set up a separate healthcare company where I'm managing the health of seniors and even patients with chronic conditions. We provide caregivers. So what I wanted to share is that I am in the financial space as well as I'm in the healthcare space. And my experience is that people don't like to, I am at this today I'm at a stage where I want to bring a conversation with my clients that it has to go hand in hand, but the clients don't wish to share either. If they've come in to me for their health services, they don't want to share their wealth matters. If they've come in from the wealth services, they don't want to discuss their health matters. It is very challenging to bring in a conversation, and I totally understand this thing, but the mindset is not ready. So can you share some more insights as to how we can bring about this conversation under one roof?
Okay, thank you very much, Sangeeta. Thank you for the extremely beyond relevant question that you're asking. Look, we have families we care for from Australia to China to Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, Dubai, Africa, Angola, Congo, Switzerland, UK, Canada, South America, and especially the Middle East. The first thing they say when they begin, when you talk to somebody kind of in the family office, they say, oh, our families are very, very discreet. Our families are very, very private. We will not share. And I can tell you that the core of creating that is creating the safe space. I'm sure you've read and heard about creating a safe space is that today I shared my story, not to present from a space of ego. I didn't share my story to create awareness of me. I created my story and I shared it so that you can introspect like you've done and to choose differently, and or maybe not. So it's today, I mean, I can give you an example, okay? So 10 days ago, I was in Switzerland. There was a gentleman in Verbier, and he wanted to meet up, and then last minute the family said, because of COVID, we like to do this over Zoom. I said, no problem, whatever works for you. We got on the call and we spoke for about 75 minutes. And this gentleman spoke about his children, the challenges he's had, the challenges with his wife, the challenges of training the next generation in the family office, the fact that he had 3 strokes in the last 15 months, mostly consecutive, okay? And he was explaining all of this, and he doesn't know me from Adam other than a referral from one of the largest multifamily offices in the world. Now, after 75 minutes, he was puzzled. He said, wait a minute, Feisal, what's in it for you? Now, what does that mean? That means that we were able to create a safe space where he did not feel that there was an agenda, that he was not a means to an end, that he was an end in himself, that you were there to truly connect, love, care, and support him, irrespective of what happens in the next step. Now, I know I'm starting to talk and you might think I'm speaking like a Guruji wearing orange clothes, but I'm not. I'm actually giving you the practical solution that I spend my life doing on a day-to-day basis. I have those conversations 1 to 2 per day, and it's an honor and privilege to be of service, right? And so all I can say to you is to create a safe space, to find an opportunity where you're able to share from your perspective stories that normally are not shared by somebody in your position. And that's how it all begins, right? In French, we say, if you're à poil, which means no clothes, hair only, there's not much challenge for somebody to remove their jacket or their sweater or even their shirt, right? Because how much worse can it get than you, right? Because you're basically, in front of us naked in this large room of so many people. Does that answer your question, or is that too philosophical? Okay, so you've given great insight. Thank you. Thank you very much. Anybody else wants to speak? It's kind of nicer to do that, or I can keep answering. Aditya, you want me to just answer some of these questions? So it says, very interesting array of services. How many clients do you have in India? Thanks for your, okay. So basically, look, we today serve about 50 families globally. We do have some families in India. You know that we run, this space is extremely beyond private. It's way more private than even the financial space. But what I can tell you is that initially, people come in, looking at originally when we started was more of a reactive model, but the majority are now coming in from a planning stage. So if we talk about India themselves, many of them are in the planning stage. Some of them are in this transition stage in terms of, the next gen preparation. I mean, I can give you an example of some of the things, right? So we work with multi-generation for values. We work on, and it's in a very, very different way than what's done traditionally, right? We work with children who are post-divorce children. We're working with couples of how to work on co-parenting. We're working with CEOs who are moving to chairmanship. I'm talking about, this is more the family business side and the dynamic side, right? We're working with CEOs to take their game to the next level in terms of energy, in terms of presence and engagement, in terms of calmness and centeredness, because they want to play the game at another level. So, there's a huge spectrum of space, but of course we have, like I said, in the last 14 and a half years, been able to create an assembly of experts that work with us, and most of them are in our core team, to be able to deliver this service. Now, of course, pre-COVID, it was done in person. Today, obviously, a lot of it is done remotely because of the challenges of travel and quarantine, etc. How do we synergize with you? As in partnership, or if somebody can unmute Charu to understand better, if that's okay. How do you market yourself? Well, look, most of our clients are coming through referral. from families. We work with multifamily offices around the world that want to truly connect with their client beyond the wealth. And they want to, because they know that communication and trust are the factors that are the risk in generational continuity. And with the largest transfer of wealth in the history of mankind, they see this as a serious risk. So they are also coming in saying, look, I'm doing the wealth side, I'm helping on the governance, or we have advisors for the governance, we have advisors for the constitution, but we don't know where to begin in this space. Can you please help us? We're also working with the family advisors who are going in, doing all this governance, constitution, legal stuff, and are saying, please help us to create a structure, which we start with a well-being trust to fund it, and then a well-being option to be able to achieve harmony, meaning fulfillment within the family, if that answers your question. Okay, so he met partnership. So we're working, like I said, with family offices, and we can take this offline if you like, to serve other families that they are serving already in another dimension, and we're more than happy to look into that. Other questions? I can keep sharing, but I'd rather, I can go into, it's asking practical ideas. I'll give you an example, okay, a practical example. So 3 siblings came to us, and they've been working with most of the top advisors. You know them. One of them obviously was speaking today. There's Barbara, there's Dennis, John Davis, John Ward, Peter Vogel, Philip Marcovici, etc. So he came in, they said, we'd like to prepare for the next gen. And most of the advisors or the others, I'm not mentioning these people specifically, but generally we're talking about how do we create, go into the governance side, the constitution side, how do we do all of that? And my response was completely different. The response was, I would highly recommend that we begin with detoxifying the relationship that exists in your generation, because that toxicity will continue in the next gen unless we clear the air. So we have spent the last 1.5 years, which I know is a long time, but it's based upon their level of engagement, working on the 3 siblings first, and then working on with the 3 siblings and the 3 spouses to let go, forgive, say I love you, remember those childhood incredible experiences that they had, to reconnect at a level that they had forgotten existed within the family. And from that space, the next gen is able to come into a space where it's an empty cup, where they get to co-create in partnership between the 2 generations. In this case, it's 3 generations. So that's one example of a different approach than just going through what is traditionally done. Questions? I guess this is a little more challenging because of the wonderful unmuting. Is anybody else wants to be unmuted? Aditya, do you have any questions before I continue? I can continue to share. I know we have more time. I can give more examples. What about you, Aditya? Do you have any question you'd like to ask that came up?
No, so I would love to know, you work across the globe, Feisal, and this is a very, very interesting and unique concept on which you work. I'm sure different regions come with their own, people come with their own sensibilities towards the same topic, that is health. Mm-hmm. So tell us some interesting examples where, you would have found some very different responses to your services, and, how has it affected how people took up to this concept in different parts of the world. So if you have some interesting anecdotes, do share.
Okay, so again, fantastic question. This gentleman that I spoke about in Verbier is a 71-year-old from England who I would have thought would have had a lot of resistance to have the conversation he had, right? I'll give you an example. We had a mama who reached out and said, I'm a great mama at a macro level, but I'm actually not a very fantastic mama at a micro level. Now, what does that mean? That means that overall, she's fantastic. But when it comes to the day-to-day, she's very reactive, right? So the initial request was, can you please help me reach out to Dr. Shafali, who's, you know, the queen of parenting in New York. She's actually my parenting coach. And I said, look, I'm more than happy to do that. You will be able to access, you know, you'll be able to have the tools, but will you actually access them in that moment in time? So it's about state of being, right? So when we started and they began the journey, everybody thought from her family's perspective that it was going to be about parenting, but actually it was about her, that she had lost trust in a lot of elements of life due to some of the experience she just had in the last 5 years and before that. So we ended up moving through some of the traumas and some of the experiences she had to shift her state of being, right? When I say state of being is that today, for example, if I show up with my baggage or my stuff, right, this conversation would be very skewed to one direction. So I don't know if so she worked she did the whole, she ate, she worked with our Ayurvedic master, she worked with a psychotherapist, she worked with the intuitive healer, she worked with a coach, she worked with, so through that process, she was able to rebuild herself so that she was no longer reactive, but responsive, right? Now, this again is a family in the UK, second generation spouse, and of course, who had, again, built a company, sold it within the family business and was now starting a new venture, right? Now, when you talk about, again, you're saying, what are the different nuances of the different regions? So obviously in the East, it's easier to talk about, Ayurveda, it's easier to talk about intuitive healing, kinesiology, Reiki, and those kind of things. But what's been interesting and quite fascinating is that COVID has opened up the space in the very conservative countries to talk about mental and emotional health, to talk about their relationships. As you know, many people were in their confined space, irrespective of the size of the home, with their families for the longest time they've ever been. And from that space, the cracks became craters and the craters became challenging. So many people are now willing to have the conversation that they weren't willing to have. So I can tell you a year ago, many of, for example, the Swiss Germans would have wanted to throw me out of the family office event and were thinking, why in the world, who invited him and why is he here? But today, those same people are willing to have the conversation because of the experience they've had in the last 9 to 12 months, depending on when you started to respond to COVID. Does that answer your question, Aditya, or do you want me to go more into the cultural side?
Absolutely, that answers. But yeah, I mean, would love to hear more on the cultural side, and specifically about India. I mean, what has been your any key unique observations about Indian clients or Indian families?
No, look, I one of the gentlemen, he's actually on the webinar as we speak, requested me to myself and my psychotherapist to support his forum. And so we got on a call a couple months ago to discuss loss of loved ones. And again, this whole concept, me also, I'm Gujarati, I'm Indian, right? So it's not any different. That, we're very secretive, we're very closed, we don't share. And we went in, and within less than 5 to 7 minutes, and the person can correct me if I'm wrong, we were able to deep dive into the conversation of the loss of my father-in-law, the loss of another elderly person, and really deep dive and move through the emotion. And this was done on Zoom. Now, of course, the psychotherapist is trained at a level that we can't even comprehend, right? And so we moved through and spent an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half going through what was showing up and to kind of help them through that process, right? Of grieving, of support, of self-love, self-care, as they move through that process of loss, right? So I truly believe, look, at the end of the day, we're all human, right? It's just a matter of creating that safety, that security, right? To be able to have, the other person to open up and share openly, right? and that happened. And it's India, right? And the age group wasn't, I mean, it was quite varied. It wasn't, just young people or just elderly. And so that's an example of something that we did, just a few months ago, right? Which was an honor and privilege. And they were, they felt better. We gave them tools. We gave them suggestions on what to do. And of course, we said, we're here to be of service if you'd like to move forward. Now, this was a forum, right? I don't want to mention, the forums that exist. There's YPO, there's EO, and some of the other ones. Okay, so that's kind of an example of the space. Does that, that's obviously a very, very sensitive topic that I spoke about. Aditya?
True, Faisal. I completely agree with you. So let me quickly check with audience. Audience, you have any further questions for Faisal, or we can request him to continue for some more time. It's just so awesome just listening to him and his stories. We have a few, I think we have another 10, 15 minutes to go.
Okay, it says implementation and concierge. Yeah, it says implementation and concierge service. So yeah, look, the thing is that, like I said, we have a 24/7 support system on the medical side when either if you're traveling or if something happens when you wake up and you need the support. So that's kind of maybe part of what you're calling about concierge, but we're way beyond that, right? Remember, what is happening today, what we offer as a service, right, is happening in silos, right? So you have your medical doctor, and within the medical system, you have multiple medical doctors who unfortunately in most cases don't communicate, right? Then within that physical space, you have your nutritionist, maybe your personal trainer, you have your sleep doctor, you have a gut specialist. I'm really taking it to the next level. You have somebody doing the genomics and epigenetics, right? But are they communicating? Now, is that person communicating with the person who's helping you through your level of presence and engagement, your thoughts, your emotions, right? Is there any communication in that space? And then also with your advisor who's helping you to create succession. I don't call it succession, I call it generational continuity, right? To build that infrastructure, maybe to move from family business to family enterprise, as Dennis was talking about, and Roger King talks about business family, right? So the question is that we are able to operate at 30,000 feet and create a communication and a leveraging of multiple dimensions to make this as seamless and as we call in flow as possible. Because at the end of the day, we want you to have the most beautiful experience in this journey called life, right? Why not, right? If you can and can choose to, why not? So it's really looking at, it's not a reactive model, but of course there is part that is there for reactive. Somebody gets sick, we need a second opinion. We're dealing with one right now, right? So this gentleman we get a referral from a family. There's a gentleman, his wife is diagnosed with one of the rarest cancers I've ever seen. And she starts, we help her out. She's in Italy. She starts with her chemotherapy. She moves through it. Next stage is cancer. The local doctor says, sorry, I won't do it. Then we reach out to the king of the jungle, who happens to be in the United States, and say, who do you have in Europe that's able to, that you trained or that uses the same methodology? They gave us names, one in the UK, one in France, and one in Italy, which happened to be the same doctor. So they are now, they actually flew to France to have the conversation. They've agreed to do surgery. The UK doctor has agreed, but with COVID, obviously, they're not going to go there. And now the conversation is, can we convince the Milan doctor to decide differently, which is now reassessing, because 2 out of 3 are saying we would go ahead and do the surgery. So I'm giving you, this is a reactive model, but it's a reactive model because they were not in the system and they were referred by a family that we cared for. So that's kind of a tough scenario, right? But I can give you another example, right? So let's say, we have a scenario where, there's challenging between spouses, and there's a discussion. Now, most people are looking at that as a negotiation. And the reality is, with all due respect, I've been through the process, you don't mess with mama bear, right? That's the last thing you want to do, right? Is mess with mama bear. And so it's how do we create a solution with the child as the core priority, right? That doesn't mean we give up everything we have, but at the same time, what is going to be the best interest of the child, right? To choose with the child first in terms of decision making and co-create something that works, letting go of the issues that we had and moving through them, right? With integrative docs, with coaches, with you may call couples therapy, we don't really call it that, right? And to create that space. But again, now this person now is now with another partner. So how do the parents show up with this new space of a former partner and a new beloved, right? And how do we handle that? I mean, I'm going through it myself, right? I mean, my own parents, are dealing with that same, and so are the kids, right? So these are some examples of, of challenges that we're dealing with. But again, we had somebody that came in through, again, a family and said, oh, I've just sold my company and I want to speak to someone about the next steps. And who do you, and what? So they called and I had a chat with them. And guess what? The reality was we spent the next 24 months on his relationship with his wife and his children, which unfortunately he had compromised or sacrificed as he built this incredible company that he sold. It was actually a family business. He had taken over from his father and turned it into an incredible success and sold it, but it came at a cost, right? In my case, as you saw, it came at a cost in terms of my health. And at the end, it came at a cost of my relationship, right? Now, obviously there's a lot more detail than just the business I ran in the relationship, but I'm just telling you is that, people are showing up for A and then B shows up and C shows up and D shows up, right? Because we're able to provide mirrors or reflections of some of the blind spots that many of us don't see, right? And that's the beauty. And I'm not saying that you need to work with Qineticare. I'm talking about whoever is in your space, right? Whoever is there that has an intention to put you first, right? Not you as a means to an end, not you with an agenda, but you truly, right? And help you move through whatever you're going through, or help you go to the next level, whatever that means to you, because it's about you. All right, Aditya, I can keep going. We have
Faisal. No, so let me just quickly check if there are more questions.
I mean, they're saying please share more stories. I mean, that I can keep doing till for the next month.
We'll have to plan it some other time. I think it's better to plan it in person here once you start traveling.
Yeah. No, so maybe I give a different example, right? So there's a CEO who's running, a $1 billion company, doing really well, marathon runner, nutrition is in gear, fitness is in gear, doing really well, and wants to take his game to the next level. So he's working with the gut and brain health individual to see whether, because his sleep is compromised. So how can is he truly getting rest and recovery? And even if he is it sustainable, right? Then working with the coaches, because I sat with him the first time he came, I asked him, I said, okay, you have 4 divisions. So he has a real estate division, a telecom division, a banking division, and oil and gas, okay? 4 divisions, which, as you can imagine, are. So I asked him, I said, let's say something happened to you and you were no longer able to be active. What would happen in these 4 companies if you were not active for 3 months? And the first company he created, he said, would have a problem. I said, okay, now it's 6 months, what would happen? He mentioned a second company. I said 9 months, he mentioned a third company. I said 12 months, now he's getting pissed off, right? And I can say it because I was out for 11 months. So he can't sit there and tell me, you don't know what I'm talking about. I've actually lived through it, right? And so what happened there, we started to ask him, so are you showing up as a leader, as a crutch, or are you empowering? And he realized that, especially in the real estate company, he was actually showing up as a crutch because that was his first love, his first baby, right? The first company he created as his generation. And as a result, he was a little bit over managing or micromanaging, while the other companies which were much, much larger and much more successful were very professionalized. So then he worked with the coach to kind of look at, okay, what can I let go? How can I empower and be more and more free, as we call it, but in reality, start working more on the business rather than in the business.
Manish is asking you, can you give some practical ideas of how do you deliver your services and how do you price it?
Okay. So the initial stage starts with what we call the Qiate, which is actually when you go to a doctor, you don't just do blood works, right? You do the whole 9 yards, right? You do blood works, you do stool, you do urine test, EKG, etc. So in the Qiate, we do an assessment from a physical perspective, mental, emotional perspective, and relational perspective. Now, what does that entail? It entails 8 different assessments, which happen 1 per week. Now, depending on where you are in the world, because the team is global, when I say global, it means India, Hong Kong, Australia, California, Switzerland, Kuala Lumpur, etc. A lot of it is done remotely, okay, except obviously the medical side. And so the 8 steps, the first step is really looking at the medical and the physical side of where you stand in terms of your health infrastructure. Are you truly protected? The second step is looking at the behaviors. What is driving your behavior? The third step is looking at gut and brain health to see the quality of your sleep and your rest and recovery. The fourth element is really looking at, like I said, thoughts and emotion, right? What is actually running in this washing machine and this circular space? The fifth is looking at your beliefs and patterns, what you have accumulated or inherited through childhood or intergenerationally. Are they serving you, or would you like to reframe? The sixth then goes to what is the story driving your life? Like I said, mine was, am I good enough? Not something that is very much of service. Then the seventh is looking at alignment. Are my values, my talents, and my aspirations in alignment? So am I living in alignment? And the last one is, because it takes time, is genomics and epigenetics to look at what my nature from a nutrition, fitness, sleep, and supplement perspective. And then from that is created, like I mentioned earlier, a well-being report, which has 72 data points, because each one gives you the key insights, growth opportunities, and desired outcomes. And then we consolidate into one for going forward. And that process is $18,000 US. Then from there, we then create a mandate, which could be anywhere from 6 months to a year to 1.5 years. And that pricing is dependent upon what you would like to move through in terms of change. I hope that answers the initial part of the question.